Welcome back in, Gearheads. Fireball coming at you with another edition of GEARHAULICS, where the gear doesn't always make the trip, but it can definitely break it. Look at this fantastic roundtable of troops that I got for me today. Not my usual roundup or my usual co-host. Decided to put them aside for this week. We've got Calvin, aka Ghost Mule from Everyday Backpacker, and Andy Metro from Metro on the Move. Andy, it's been a minute. How you guys doing tonight? How you feeling?
Pretty good, pretty good. Thanks for having us.
Doing great. Yeah, doing great.
Excellent. Excellent. Great to have you back. So the topic for tonight, and this is a good one too. I'm kind of sad that nobody else could join this one because I've been looking forward to this one for a little bit now. It's all about what we're calling a gear progression. So kind of, and you can probably guess this, where we started out compared to kind of where we are today. So each one of the co-hosts here, I've asked them to put in their own personal anecdotes in a few different categories that we're going to be going through tonight. And then also just to pitch in whatever they feel and whatever they saw, kind of like in general, what they're seeing other backpackers do at the same time. So this first one here, and not to put Calvin on the spot here, I want to go last for this first one, but we're going to start at the beginning. We're going to start off where you first started out. And let's just keep it to that, like how you first started out, how did you first kind of get into it, and what kind of gear were you using when you first started backpacking?
Right on.
So
yeah.
Ahead,
So for me, my career as a backpacker started way back in the early to mid 90s. And really my big first entry into this hobby was through the Boy Scouts. I'm sure a lot of people say that. Of course, it's the Scouts now. And specifically, we went on a trip in 1997 to Philmont Scout Ranch. And so we did a 10-day long, I want to say it was like 100 or close to 100-mile trip in the Santa de Crista mountain range in New Mexico. And as being somebody who started out in the 90s, my gear was dramatically different than what it is now. In fact, a lot of those things would be probably in a museum somewhere if I still had them. But, you know, I was rocking the North Face Badlands, which I think is their first ever internal frame backpack. It had like padding on it. It was like 3 inches thick. It looked like you were strapping into a car seat.
nice.
You know, I think that pack alone weighed 15 pounds, 12 pounds, something like that. Jeez. Now you've got base weights that are that much. You know, we had the Thermarest pads, the self-inflators, because that was all that existed, that and the Ridge Rest. And, you know, that was the latest and greatest amazing thing. And Big Agnes hadn't come out with the Air Core yet, which is considered to be the front runner of all of the inflatables now that are popular. We had the old A-frame tents, like I'm not kidding, the little wedge A-frames with 2 poles that met the top. And I thought it was pretty hot backpacking gear guy because I had a North Face Cat's Meow synthetic sleeping bag that it was a mummy bag. It was all psychedelically colored because we were in the 90s and we didn't know any better. And, you know, I was rocking that out. And I remember we thought we were doing really good because we were able to get our base weight down to around 50 pounds. And that was pretty amazing. The only thing that I still have from that time period, I still have a Whisperlight stove that I bought in 1996. And again, it was the most up-to-date and greatest equipment we had. And if I could have used the gear I have now back then, it would have been an altogether different trip. But, you know, there's a little bit of a trip down nostalgia lane. I think my clothing, I was wearing like 100% cotton BDU pants. And then I had one of those really cool brand new fleece things, the quarter zip fleece things on it that, you know, that was pretty brand new. I think my mid layer, I'm not shitting you, was a flannel shirt because again, we just didn't know any better. So yeah, that was my beginnings as a backpacker. Sorry to go off on tangents there.
No,
it's crazy to believe that like 50 pounds was considered like kind of on the mark back in the day.
Unheard of nowadays. You hear that and you're like, dude, something wrong, man.
Yeah. You're going like deep into winter backpacking at that point. All right, Metro, what you got? How did you first start off?
Oh, so I mean, I don't want to show my age or anything, but the external frames, we had a Kelty pack with the actual pack on the outside of the frame was my first pack, but I wouldn't consider that to be where I thought I was really coming up, right? So my first real pack I remember getting was like the REI Mars 80. It was probably like around like 2010 or something around that. But it's an 80-liter pack, right? And how I got into it was like I had all the stuff that was from the old school, like the heavy stuff, already, because I've been backpacking my entire life. But when I started buying the gear, my buddies were like, "Oh, you got to get this stuff," and at the time it was still pretty heavy. It was like 5-pound tents or whatever it might be. You're still like throwing it in this 80-liter pack. You're like, dude, I got all this stuff now. But they were buying all this stuff. I was like, man, I can't believe you guys are spending all this money on backpacking gear. I've got all this stuff. It's just fine. But then I got the bug, right? So then I was kind of like going from there. But I had a huge pack. It was awesome. I probably got it for like $150 at REI, but it was awesome. And I kind of wish I still had it. But, REI used to have that lifetime policy. So as we go through this episode, I'll talk about how I upgraded those packs to get where I'm at today.
Right. Yeah, that's amazing. I'm just going to mention it right here in my spiel in the beginning too. The reason why I wanted you guys to go first is because I'm probably one of the newest additions here. I've only started really getting into backpacking the last few years, and before that, I was only really on like a couple of camping trips. So great to have the background from you guys first. So I feel like I was a little bit more advantageous as far as like diving into YouTube and just kind of like seeing what everybody else had done first before kind of jumping in. So I guess I had that slight benefit, but I still made all of the common mistakes that I think we all kind of see here, which is I'm not sure if I'm going to like it. So let me jump on Amazon. Let me buy a bunch of like cheap Chinese gear.
Oh, yeah.
Super heavy. I had like the 65-liter pack as well. Not quite as heavy as Ghost Mule, but it still was like almost 5 pounds. Just something that.
What was the pack?
I don't even remember the name of it, honestly.
Like they had names like Big Natural or something like that. You're like, what is this?
It wasn't even like Ozark Trail. It was just some rando on
but it worked,
on
right?
Amazon.
It worked.
Yeah, I mean it works, but you're falling into the same trap like you guys had talked about, where you get something that's super huge, you have the extra space, so you're like, I'm just going to pack for everything under the sun and pack for all your fears. So that's what I did. So getting back to Andy's point here, what I'd recommend doing here, first and foremost, I'd say whether it is an REI or a smaller cottage brand, because I know Ghost Mule works for a little bit, of a smaller name, see if they have rentals. I think that's probably one of the biggest pieces of advice that I can give people first, especially if it's your first trip out, your first couple, you're not sure what you like. Go in there, talk with the experts, talk with Calman here, see what they can help you dial in, and just rent it first. If that's not an option, or it's just not something that you can do, I know that's not something that Andy and I like to tout that often, but REI has a 1-year return policy. Andy said it used to be a lifetime. It's still now 1 year, and it's really any kind of condition that it's in. You could have it used. You can beat it up for 363 days and still return it on the 364th. That's not something that is something that we super like to tout, but it's an option. It's something that you can do if you have a bigger budget to kind of throw around.
With that being said, though, you can go to REI and they'll have a scratch and dent sale. So if you're looking to get into backpacking and you're not sure what you want and you want to start on a budget, again, it's not like those types of items just go to waste. It's like, it does like pay it forward to some capacity, right?
Yeah, and I love the juxtaposition here because, like, I'm laughing internally because I'm thinking about when I first started out, the resources we had were like Colin Fletcher's The Complete Walker series was like the book that you could kind of go, and it had like these line drawing items in it. And then we would get the Campmore catalog, which were the old like newsprint with the like the little pictures in them and stuff. And so like that was like the most image you would get, and you try to order stuff. And if you were fortunate enough to have a shop nearby, like we had a shop in town. It was called General Surplus. It doesn't exist anymore in Dayton, Ohio. And sometimes you could get them to order you stuff and everything, but like what you had is what was available. And you had like I had like 5 packs to choose from. And, you know, now it's like you have this, you know, one company alone has, I think Osprey alone has like 17 different styles of pack. And we had 5, like there were 5 different brands. There was like a Kelty and a North Face and REI and all those. And in the Midwest, we hadn't even heard of REI yet. It wasn't a thing out there. I think we went to Galleons was the other place that we went.
Ooh.
Yeah. But
Like
it's very interesting. And it's really cool too, though, because like nowadays you have so many resources available. So some of us had a lot harder time in the beginnings than others. Sorry, tangent.
No, it's great. I love the perspective, especially going back that far. All right, good roundup of where we were in the beginning. Let me solo myself and get into the next one here, which is after you're hooked is what I have for the second category here. And this is basically like you went out for the first time, whether it's with crappy gear or more decent gear for whatever reason. I mean, and I think like all of us here could probably mention this as well. First trip out, probably not going to go the most smooth. It's probably not going to be the best trip ever, right? So, but for whatever reason, you ended up getting the bug anyway. You're starting to get into it a little bit more. So this is, for me personally, when I started to just dive headfirst more so into taking in as much information on gear as possible. Not everybody's a gearhead. Not everybody's into the gear. I understand that. But for me personally, I definitely am. So that's when I started to look at like all the different specs, comparing all the different companies, right? Pack size, volume size versus, you know, when it's spread out. You're starting to get more into the differences in material, sil nylon versus sil poly versus DCF and ultra, right? Different types of fills for your sleeping bags or quilts, different things like that. So in this phase, I would still recommend renting, believe it or not. In this phase, you're starting to think about it a little bit more, going like, I think I like this area, so I think I want to invest in that area, and you probably will. But at the same time, I'd still say rent as much as possible, or try to get your hands on different things that you can swap out to really start to try and dial in what you like. But that's my spiel on after you start really getting into it. So Ghost Me, will kick it over to you. What about that next phase after you caught the bug?
Yeah, so for me, I think the next phase, because I did take a break for a while. I went into the fire service, and that wasn't really greatly conducive for doing a lot of stuff. But you know, we started having the versioning internet and starts of gear forums and things like that, and so there was a little bit more information going around. And then for me, you know, I got into eventually would get into going back to college, and I was going to college for an outdoor degree. And so I was able to get kind of tapped into some of the community. And I was also volunteering for park districts and leading trips and things like that. And so very similarly, just kind of a different strain. You know, like what you said is perfect. You know, you start really paying attention to things like fabric choices and gear choices, and really looking at what do I actually need versus what do I think I need. And, you know, you start learning things like evaluating every trip and seeing what gear did I use and what gear didn't I use, and what gear can I use for multiple things. And I think it's a period of refinement. And you know, renting is still a really great option, because you're going to have an opportunity to try out different stuff, but also, you know, getting opportunities to go with other people who might have a little bit more experience. You know, for me, it was working with other people who had either already had the degree, or, you know, the coolest thing is one of the guys that I volunteered with at a park district, he had hiked Appalachian Trail, and it was like, oh, you know, this guy was pretty awesome back, you know, this is early, you know, mid 2000s and stuff, before, you know, you had all those names out there. And so it was like this almost mythical creature, and being able to pick up on some of their nuances. And not to say that you have to do everything. I think we get caught in these grooves, especially in this period of progression, where we feel like we have to do what so-and-so does because they're, you know,
Right.
they're amazing. And that's not true at all, because everybody's needs are going to be a little bit different. You know,
Yeah.
I like to give Fireball grief every once in a while because of gear uses, but at the end of the day, we use what works for us, and we've come across that, and we're able to kind of juxtapose those things in a fun way. But generally speaking, like, it's valuable because I can see what maybe I get to see something he's using that I had never heard of before. And so the biggest thing I could say in this period of time is don't be afraid to make mistakes. Obviously, some of those mistakes have a bigger financial impact than others. But, you know, if something doesn't work out, don't necessarily look at it as a negative. You know, look at it as just something that you're experiencing and learning. It should be progressive. And like, as the word terms, you know, you start out, and I see this in the shop all the time. When a person comes in and they say they want a certain piece of gear, my question is, okay, are you a new backpacker? Have you been doing this for a while? Is this something that you've, building for? Because you can almost tell a person who experience level by the amount of gear they have, because I'm not probably going to recommend a smaller pack for a new backpacker, because that new backpacker is typically going to be carrying more gear. And so they're going to need a little bit bigger volume pack. And as they start to kind of shed that down, they can go into a smaller pack. Doesn't mean that they're doing it wrong. It just means that they're in a different phase. And so this can be, I think, a very frustrating period of time for gear progression for a lot of people, because our natural tendency is to want to compare ourselves to other people. And with the internet and with YouTube, it's so hard not to. And I think we can all agree with that. And, I would even go as far as to say, don't take my word for it. My least favorite question in the shop is, what gear do you use? Meaning me. And I'm like, man, I use what works for me, but I don't know that it's going to work well for you. So like I say, I think the hardest lesson in this period of gear progression is, don't get your heart too set on something, and don't feel like you have to compare yourself to another hiker, because this is not a competitive sport. And although our nature is to give each other crap for what kind of gear we have, at the end of the day, we've all been there, we've all done it, and you're not doing anything wrong unless you're doing something that's going to hurt somebody, like Snack Box trying to set Fireball on fire.
Hence the name. Yes. Excellent points there. All right, Andy, how about you? After you caught the bug, what was the next step for you, and what kind of tips can you give everybody?
So again, like, I had gear, right? So then I got my first little setup of all the stuff I collected. I wasn't trying to spend a lot of money. I was just trying to fill out a kit. So I was hiking, normal 3 to 7 miles on backpacking trips. And, over time, getting older, my knees started hurting. So I was like, I don't want to carry all this weight. So I kind of got rid of my pack as a whole and just started like thinking, what could I take the least amount of to go out there with? So I kind of stripped down to a different perspective. So I had a full pack, lots of weight. My knees are hurting. I couldn't do the miles. So I was like, let's do something different. So I started buying lighter items. And to your point, I started looking at the specs and tried to get it as low as possible. Bought brands like Z packs, and I got a couple different packs from Waymark and Hyperlight Mountain Gear. Those are some lighter pack options. And again, I didn't necessarily have to have those things at the beginning, but because my body was not doing so good with my knees, I wanted to do longer miles. I had to have less weight on me. So I then said, okay, instead of just going out and buying a whole nother kit, I just started being very strategic about what do I need to take with me, and then trying to replace those items to become more lighter, right? So the mistake that I made is that I didn't buy my pack last, right? I kept on buying. To your point, you get a smaller pack, you go through this phase. Oh, I'm gonna just this is all I need, and then you get the smaller pack. It doesn't all fit, and it's just not very comfortable. So it's, again, if you could do it, just get whatever you can. Go backpacking, know your limits, and if you're trying to go further, try and reduce your weight over time, and buy strategic gear. Don't just buy junk like you want to. Like, oh, this is one more piece. Just be strategic about it. So no pack shaming. It's just all about physical for me, why I got the bug to keep going. And that's probably the most expensive thing that ever happened to me in my life. So I'm not really proud of what happened in this getting the bug phase, but it definitely costs. It costs to be the boss. I guess you're going to pay the price to go lighter for sure.
Yeah, you hit on some great points there. I think you kind of like jumped into like an earlier category compared to the next one that I'm going to talk about. But I really want to reiterate here also one of Ghost Mule's points where he had mentioned um, comparing yourself to other people. So I definitely want to back that up and go, you know, especially us here on YouTube, like use this as a guide, not as the ultimate rule, right? Like we're here to kind of like try to help guide you along, but don't just necessarily take our word as like this is the end all be all, right? The other thing too, right? Real quick before we round up this particular category that I want to mention is you might hear this term called buy once, cry once. And this could be the phase where you'd have the urge to do that, right? Where you're like, oh, I'm just going to drop the most amount of weight, like Andy said, and let me just, you know, buy once, cry. Let me get all Dyneema stuff and everything. But I would kind of urge you against that because you're still trying to figure things out. You're still trying to dial in what you like. So you don't necessarily want to jump the gun and just start spending thousands at this stage, especially if it's not something that really, really works for you. So again, I'm not sure how much of like the Dyneema stuff that you can actually rent. I don't even know if that's a possibility.
No,
but
I've never seen a Dyneema rental
yeah,
spot before.
yeah,
normally
it's tough.
Rental stuff you have to get a decent quality because we rent stuff at our shop. You have to get decent quality, but it also has to survive being a rental. And as much as we would love to rent out a copper spur or something at $400, we just can't afford to. So yeah,
right.
Maybe somewhere down the line somebody will get a wild bird to do that, but yeah, it's tough to find that kind of stuff in a rental.
Yeah, for sure. So that stuff is kind of hard to figure out and get your hands on. You definitely want to start looking for deals in this phase as well, as much as and pretty much every phase. But yeah, I think that's a good roundup for kind of like that after you're hooked kind of stage. Let's just move along right here. 3 out of 4 here. We got 4 different categories tonight. The next one is kind of again going along with the progression here. Andy's got up the garage grown gear, so I'm assuming he's going to be talking about more cottage stuff in this section here, but. Let me kick things off here and give you my 2 cents on it. So for more of like dialing it in this phase, and I still kind of consider myself more so, I think, kind of in this phase right now in my journey here. And in this phase, I think you're going to start focusing on categories that you know and love. So kind of like what you picked up on your first few trips, or maybe the first year or two of getting into this sport hobby, whatever we want to call it. And you're going to be starting to really put a value on what I like to call the gear philosophy, right? So weight, price points, comfortability, pack volume size, different things like that, creature feature type stuff. These types of categories you're going to start to really put a lot of weight into. You're also probably still going to be or if you have it in the second phase, you might start getting obsessed with things like weight, right? We had talked about that already, where we're talking about ultralight gear and kind of obsessing over like having the lightest pack, thinking that, well, if I've got the ultimate lightest pack, right, I reduce it by like a pound or two, and that means I can go farther, I can do things better or whatever, right? Which isn't necessarily true. And that's probably what we're going to get into the final category. But that's going to be my roundup there, kind of kicking it off into dialing it in. Ghost Mule, what do you got during this phase?
Yeah, so like for me, I look at this as being the maturing phase. And actually, a lot of my philosophies are very similar to what Metro talked about in his kind of second area there, where my age starts to become more of a factor at this point. Professionally, it's at this point in my life that I did become professional in the gear side of things. I started doing outdoor retail. And as my profession, I started to look into it more. And then, of course, also started doing the YouTube thing myself. And that is like a gateway drug. I mean, that just opens you up to all these new things. Garage grown gear is a great example of that. Like the first thing I remember the first time I heard about that and I looked on it, I was like, oh, there's all this stuff that I didn't even know existed. And yep. I feel like this part of the progression should be fairly static for most people because you start to really understand what your preferences are and you start getting things really dialed in. I noticed that, I'm kind of using similar gear all the time, and I know where my comforts are, and I know where my skill levels are, and my gear reflects that, and so it's become fairly static. The caveat to that staticness, though, is that things are constantly changing. If I've learned anything over the years, starting out in the 90s, progressing into the 2000s, the 2010s, and the 2020s is they're constantly pushing that envelope. And even though you might get a system down that is just like, boom, this is it, I am in it, I find that no matter what, I'm always getting a new piece of gear. Why? Because something came out and I didn't know it was there. I just finally broke down and got a pump for my pads. I was using for the longest time, and I got one of those Zero pumps by Flextail, and I've been playing around with it, and it's pretty sweet. And again, it goes back to the fact that I am in a different place as a hiker. As I get older, I'm lazier, and I don't want to sit there and blow up a damn pad. I've been doing it for 40 years. So, I'm going to plug this thing in, and I'm going to enjoy that. That said, I definitely have my back in my day moments where, about gear that I do or don't like. And, but I do think that that's the cool part of that kind of, dialing in phase, is that you really start to learn where you are as a hiker, as a person, what your, habits are, and it makes it easier to kind of tone out all of that staticky noise in the background of all the different stuff, because a lot of it is that, and you might find some gear that really piques your interest, and then you might say, well, I've already got a really good one. But definitely for me, as I got older, I'll be 45 in a couple months, weight is an issue. The lighter I can make my system, the more enjoyment I get out of it. Or the more I can add things that are more comfort items, such as a chair or a little electric pump to pump up my pad because I'm lazy, or a bear canister because I live in grizzly country and I am just fed up with throwing a dang bear bag. Those are just grumpy old hiker things, and the gear offers opportunities to kind of dial it in and kind of, solve those things. And, like I said, and like Metro said, at no point in these levels should you necessarily feel like you have to go broke in order to enjoy it. You don't have to replace all of your gear at once. I have never once done a full gear switch. It's always been this piece here and this piece there. And it's very gradual. And, it's easy. I'm getting ready to do a 5-year anniversary of the channel, and the gear that I had when I started is very different than the gear I had now, but it's been a very gradual change throughout those years. So, but yeah, I think that the dialing it in portion of life is just knowing what your limitations are and having the gear to accommodate that.
So, to add to that, to the dialing it inside, you get all this stuff and you have it in front of you. What I always recommend from a dialing it in perspective is to get comfortable with your gear to the point of where you're touching at least all of the items in your pack throughout every trip. Like if you're not using it, you should be thinking about ditching it. Now I know there's some safety things you should be thinking about, but when you go to dialing it in, it could be less is more, right?
Absolutely.
I know at this point, in terms of dialing it in, I've got my system to a point of where I know what's in every single compartment, what pieces are in there. I'm going to use every single thing is in there. And my biggest goal on every trip now is to consume the food, all of it, like to have it to a point of where I know I'm going to consume every bit by the time I get off trail. Even dialing it in could be like, okay, so you're backpacking, you've got it dialed in, having things like a light load towel to make sure you can get the condensation off of your tent and making sure you have something light. I mean, I've used, a fancy bandana like you got there as a dual purpose so you don't get shot. Also, at the same time, use it to, again, clean up camp and so forth. There's a lot of different things you can multi-purpose. Use gear that has dual purpose, right? Again, dialing it in doesn't necessarily mean buying a bunch of other stuff. It could be just taking less and making sure you have your stuff organized. I will say from my experience, what has been the most beneficial is I have the Hyperlight system with the pods. Again, this is expensive stuff, but everything, I have an inside bag, inside the tent, outside the tent bag. I've got everything broken down to where I know when I go on trail, I can do the miles, set up camp, and be good to go within 15 minutes. That's my style, and I'm very happy to be at this point. So the maturing phase, dialing it in, yeah, it's great once you get there because it makes every trip awesome.
Oh
Excellent.
yeah, and you can definitely see, especially if you're camping with different types of people who are like in different stages, right? You definitely can pick apart like who is a little bit more advanced with their gear as opposed to who isn't.
Now,
And
I want to
Metro
add
saw that firsthand.
one thing before we jump
Yeah.
off of this though. Like, so I was doing a foothills through hike, right? I was just out there. It was 76 miles. I do this in 4 days, and I had light pack. I was able, no problem. But when I'm out there, I hadn't seen anybody for a couple of days, and I roll into camp, and it was more like a not too far in kind of camp place from a like a trailhead that was not too far. One of the few that was on trail. At this place, you did see people that had like the old school gear, like I was talking about, like, the external frame, but it was like stained, sleeping bags and things of that nature. And they weren't really wearing hiking gear. So when you're out there hiking, even though there might be people in different stages of the progression, there's people that are out there because they are on the move, for lack of a better word. So
Yeah.
you meet
Unhoused.
all kinds of backpackers out there, not just the everyday backpacker or, the professional, whatever. You're going to run into, people that are
Yep.
on the move as well. So don't judge those
Yep.
people, but be cautious at the same time.
Yeah.
Good
Those
advice.
are those are excellent points. Yeah, I mean, somebody could still be stuck in the 90s era, right? That Coleman was talking about, where they're just like,
Yeah,
hey,
you
this
could
has been
say
working
stuck
for
in the
me. So
90s for lack of better. Yeah, there you go.
Maybe not
we
by
look at that as a little bit weird, but it's working for them, so that's what they're sticking with. All right, good roundup. 3 out of the 4 done here. Let's move into the last category that I got for you guys, which is to talk about the future, right? Or again, I shy away from trying to like say like this is the pro status or something, because it really isn't. Let's just talk about like sort of like getting towards the end of your progression here, where you've already dialed it in. You kind of know where everything is. If you're good like Metro and you can eat all your food, you're eating all your food. I think Calvin and I still have an issue with that one, but the future here and that I'm going to talk about is to say something like, and I kind of look at this category as the put it back phase, where maybe you've gone a little bit off the deep end. Everybody kind of dabbles with the ultralight stuff, trying to get their base weight ultralight 10 pounds or under. But then you start thinking, like Kalman had mentioned too, like, well, maybe my knees are hurting a little bit more. And even though it's ultralight, I want to have more comfort. So the put it back phase is, let me just start adding back a little bit of weight here and there. So instead of 10 pounds, maybe I'll go to 12 or 13, whatever that makes me more comfortable when I'm at trail and or at camp. So the next thing that I would say here would be your gear closet at this stage is probably going to be more like a Swiss Army knife, right? It's going to be the ultimate toolkit, where you're basically just taking stuff in and out and custom making your kit to fit whatever trip you're going to be going on, whether it be elevation, weather, humidity, whatever factors you're going to be facing when you're out on trail, and based on the trip that you're going on. Maybe you're going into different states or whatever. You're venturing out farther than your original comfort zone. But I think the biggest thing here is just getting to know that, you're best prepared to enjoy your trips at this phase, I think. So you're not necessarily really obsessing about, where is this thing, or how do I use this thing, or is this going to be right for me? You already know that, right? So I think at that phase, you're kind of just, I know this stuff works for me. It's great. And now I could just solely focus on enjoying it, right? And just being out there, and not just like worrying about, is this going to work out for me, or is this going to fail, or do I have to test this out in order for it to work? I think we're always going to do that to some extent, but I think the biggest priority is to just enjoy your trips at this point. And that's always the priority, right? That should always be your number one priority, of just getting outdoors. But I think you're better equipped to do that in this phase. But what do you think, Kalman, as far as like the future and kind of going post dialing it in?
Yeah, I think you touched on it right there. This is the phase where maybe your gear and your knowledge and your skill levels are to the point where maybe gear and things like that isn't always necessarily in the forefront of your thought process, and so you're able to focus on those other aspects of the trip that are a little bit more important. My big thing with this one, being working in the industry and stuff, is that and this also may me sound like a grumpy old backpacker in a sense, but my concern with this part of it is that this is where a lot of people, I think, get themselves into the flip side of trouble, because the two biggest issues people run into is lack of experience and over dependence on experience. And so you might find yourself in this point where you start to get a little bit lackadaisical in your skills and your things, and especially nowadays with technology and stuff coming out that is changing the way that we approach our skill sets. Because I think that, you know, there's two big things we take into the backcountry with us. One of them being our gear, the other one being our knowledge and how we utilize those things. And I see, unfortunately, a lot of things that are kind of replacing some of that gear, and some of it's good and some of it is not. And I'm just, my only concern here is that we run a tightrope, because if you become so dialed in that you become complacent, you might run into a situation where you run the risk of getting yourself into a bad situation. And not everybody. I mean, like I said, I don't think it should be a situation where we are constantly thinking about gear at all. I think that is the important part. But you know, I feel like in this point in my career, I really find myself going back and kind of relearning some of those skills that I maybe haven't used a lot in a while, because of, you know, the fact that I have gotten so comfortable in my own experience level. And so I think that, you know, enjoy the fact that you are at a point where you have it so well dialed in that it's not a forefront, but don't use that as an excuse to totally sidestep it, so to speak.
Yeah.
And then potentially get yourself in trouble. You know, we just heard about that unfortunate situation where a triple crowner, obviously somebody who has gotten a lot of experience under his belt, you know, unfortunately passed away in the whites. And I think that's a good wake-up call that it can happen to any one of us. So enjoy the fact that you are to a point where you don't have to think about those things, but don't necessarily rest on those laurels. Not to be a Debbie Downer on that one, but just the professional in me always makes it say, you know, enjoy it, but also don't enjoy it so much that you get yourself in trouble.
Yeah.
Well, so on that note, you know, for people that are starting out backpacking, it's not like you just throw things in a backpack and go out. You know, you got to do a little bit of research and get yourself ramped up for different types of adventures. But most of them, you know, like I would say that if you're just going on well-known popular trails, it's not the same as going into the wilderness in some areas, especially like the AT is crazy, right? There's all kinds of intense inclines, declines, but the weather changes so quickly. It's just like various different parts of the country. And, you know, if you're not familiar with that kind of terrain to start, you know, you don't just throw the stuff in your backpack like, oh, I'm going to go just tackle the world. It's like, it's awesome to be that ambitious. But the future for me is this. I've got a lot of gear for different types of hikes. And again, if I'm going out into the wilderness, I'm not relying on my own knowledge of that area. I'm going to someone that's in that area and knows it very well. It's almost like having a guide. I'm not saying you have to have a guide. It's just smarter to know someone's local to kind of walk you through the ins and outs of what you're going to need before you throw yourself in that situation. Now, I would say, again, with gear, it's not just backpacking, tents, sleeping bags, all that stuff. Your clothing, your shoes, your socks even is things that you really want to invest in. So again, the future for me is I always invest in good socks, good shoes, you know, and I have the best I can possibly get in the market only because I use it and I want to have a good time out there. Again, the future for me is I have dialed in packs for every adventure, different gear for different things, but I share that. I don't just, hey, it's mine, whatever. When people want to go backpacking, I say, what are you looking for? If there's similar frame, you use my stuff. So it's a nice way to take other people out and share the experience without them saying, you got to lug your own stuff, buddy. We're going hiking. It's going to be awesome. They're like, what about your gear? Well, don't look at my stuff. Look at you. You look ridiculous. Now that I let people borrow my stuff all the time. You know? So the future is sharing is caring. So get gear, be prepared for all different types of trips, whether it be, you know, local, well-popular trails or out in the wilderness. Just have a nice arrange, like a gear room, and just organized, and you can get what you need for the right trip. That's the future, and continue to film videos. And the channel is about to hit 5,000 subscribers. I'm happy. So those that haven't heard of Metro on the Move, please go watch my channel. I'm almost at 5,000. It's been almost 10 years for me, and we just hit about 1.3 million views. So I'm really excited. Thank you for following the channel. And obviously, you see the gear getting used. So if you're interested in more information on the gear progression, I guess is go visit my channel and see how I started out. The videos are there. They go back decades at this point.
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah, for sure. I want to sum up a couple of points that you guys had mentioned. One is going to be, don't get lazy. You should always be learning when you're out there. You should always be trying to progress and add to your repertoire. Don't stay stagnant. So that is an important point that I got from Ghost Mule there. And then the second thing from Metro here is branching out your social network, figuring out who lives in what area. Hopefully you're gaining a bunch of friends. I mean, these guys right here, we're not even in the same state, but you know, I'm sure if I ever go to these states that I've got some great guides who can kind of point me in the right direction.
100.
So I'm not just shooting in the dark. Right. So all excellent points, guys. You know, we could probably talk about this one forever too, just kind of scratching the surface. Thank you so much for joining us today, or joining me today, guys. Let me throw up the socials just to throw him some love here. For Calman here, an Everyday Backpacker. Check him out on YouTube. He's Everyday Backpacker. And then on Instagram, Everyday_Backpacker. And then Andy here on YouTube is Metro on the Move. And on Instagram, also Metro on the Move, just all one word. Definitely hit him up. Show him some love. If this one was a premiere, thank you so much for joining the chat. If not, hit us up in the comments down below. We'd love to answer any questions you guys have. Thank you very much again, guys, for joining this week. And we'll see you on the next one.
Thanks.